I never thought a Tuesday morning would be the day I'd discover that the people I loved most wanted to destroy me. But standing in that parking garage, listening to a homeless stranger tell me my daughter-in-law was plotting to steal everything my husband left me, I realized that grief makes us vulnerable in ways we never imagine. I'm Eleanor Thompson, and this is my story. Please stay with me until the end, and comment where you're watching from so I can see how far my truth has traveled. I woke up that morning to silence. 4 months after Harold's death, I still wasn't used to it. The absence of his breathing beside me, the missing clink of his coffee mug in the kitchen, the quiet where his humming used to fill our bathroom while he shaved. At 64 years old, I thought I knew what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. The call from Morrison and Associates came at exactly 9 o'clock, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. Harold's coffee, really. I'd kept buying the French roast he loved even though I preferred a lighter blend. Silly maybe, but it made me feel like he was still here somehow. Mrs. Thompson, this is Patricia Wells from Morrison and Associates. We're ready to proceed with your husband's estate settlement. Can you be here at 2 o'clock today? Her voice was crisp, professional. Not unkind exactly, but with that carefully neutral tone people use when they're about to deliver news that will change your life. I'd heard that tone 4 months ago when Dr. Hayes told us Harold's cancer had spread to his liver. When he said weeks, maybe 2 months, instead of the years we'd been praying for. Yes, I'll be there, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Inside, my stomach was churning. This meeting felt different from all the others. The lawyers, the accountants, the endless paperwork that follows death like a shadow. This was the final one. After today, Harold's life would be reduced to numbers and accounts, deeds to properties, investment portfolios divided and distributed according to his wishes. Everything to me. That's what he'd always said. Eleanor, everything goes to you. You earned it by putting up with me for 43 years. He'd laugh when he said it, though his eyes told a different story. Harold never joked about important things. I chose my navy blue suit, the one he bought me for our 40th wedding anniversary 2 years ago. We'd celebrated at that little Italian restaurant downtown where he proposed back in 1980. He'd gotten down on one knee right there in front of everyone, and when the owner brought out champagne on the house, Harold had whispered in my ear, "Best decision I ever made, Eleanor Marie. Best decision of my life." Standing in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening the pearl necklace he gave me on our wedding day, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. When had I gotten so old? The auburn hair Harold loved was now more silver than red. The laugh lines around my eyes, he used to trace them with his finger and say they were proof of a life well lived, now just looked like evidence of time passing. 4 months of grief had carved new shadows under my eyes, hollowed out my cheeks. I touched the pearls at my throat. Harold had fastened this same necklace 43 years ago, his fingers fumbling with the clasp, both of us laughing nervously in the church basement before our wedding. "Ready to do this thing, Ellie?" he'd asked. I'd been 21 years old, teaching 2nd grade, absolutely certain of nothing except that I loved this man more than I thought possible. "Ready as I'll ever be, Harold." His wedding ring still sat on his nightstand. I hadn't been able to put it away, couldn't bear to see his place empty. Sometimes late at night I'd pick it up and slip it on my thumb, the only finger it would fit, and pretend he was just in the other room, that any moment I'd hear his footsteps coming back to bed. The drive downtown took longer than expected. Traffic was heavier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon, and I found myself drumming my fingers nervously on the steering wheel. Why was I so anxious? This should be straightforward. Harold and I had discussed his will dozens of times over the years. We'd updated it together just 18 months ago, sitting at this very dining room table with his reading glasses perched on his nose, making sure everything was in order. "David gets the house after you're gone," he'd said, making notes in the margin of the document. "And Vivian seems like a sweet girl. I think she really loves our boy. Vivian, my daughter-in-law of 8 years. I smiled, thinking of her. She'd been so attentive during Harold's illness, always offering to drive him to appointments when David was busy with work, bringing over meals, sitting with me in the hospital during those final terrible weeks. Just last month, she'd stopped by with flowers and a card. "Thinking of you, Eleanor. Harold was such a wonderful man. We'll get through this together." The parking garage beneath the Morrison and Associates building was dimly lit, concrete pillars casting long shadows in the fluorescent lighting. I pulled into a spot on the 2nd level, my hands trembling slightly as I turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and absolute. No traffic noise filtered down here, no city sounds. Just the tick-tick-tick of my engine cooling and the echo of my own breathing. I gathered my purse and the folder of documents Patricia Wells had asked me to bring. Insurance policies, property deeds, account statements. My fingers wouldn't quite steady themselves. Why? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This was just paperwork. Legal formalities. Nothing to be afraid of. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Ma'am? Mrs. Thompson?" I spun around, my heart suddenly pounding. A man was approaching from behind one of the concrete pillars, and my first instinct was to run. He was probably in his early 50s, wearing clothes that had seen much better days. A worn denim jacket with a torn pocket, faded jeans, scuffed work boots with the laces knotted where they'd broken. His hair was disheveled, graying at the temples, and he had the weathered, deeply lined face of someone who'd spent too many nights sleeping rough. My hand went to my purse, fingers searching for my phone. Harold had always warned me about parking garages. "Never let your guard down, Ellie. You're too trusting." But something made me pause. Maybe it was the way the man stopped several feet away, keeping a respectful distance. Maybe it was his eyes, not threatening or wild, but deeply concerned, almost desperate. Or maybe it was just that after 4 months of grief, I was too tired to be properly afraid. "I don't have any cash," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, just leave me alone." "Ma'am, please, I'm not asking for money." His voice was educated, the accent of someone who'd grown up in the city but had gone to decent schools. "You're Mrs. Thompson, right? Harold Thompson's widow?" My blood ran cold. "How do you know my name? How do you know about my husband?" He glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. "I worked here, for Morrison and Associates. I was a paralegal on the 15th floor for 15 years. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "They fired me 5 weeks ago, but before they did, I heard things. Things about your husband's will. Things about you." I should have walked away. I should have called security. But instead, I found myself asking, "What things?" "Your daughter-in-law, Vivian." He said her name carefully, watching my face. "She's been meeting with Richard Morrison, not just once or twice, 8 times in the past 6 months. And they're not talking about normal estate planning, Mrs. Thompson." The parking garage suddenly felt colder. "I don't understand what you're implying. I'm saying they're planning to take everything from you." He spoke quickly now, words tumbling out. "I heard them in Morrison's office 3 weeks ago. They have documents, medical records, statements from people claiming you're not mentally competent to handle your husband's estate." The words stopped me cold. My hand found the car door for balance. "That's impossible. I've never been diagnosed with anything. I'm perfectly fine." "I know you are, ma'am. That's why I've been waiting here, hoping to catch you before the meeting." He pulled a small USB drive from his jacket pocket. "I made copies before they fired me. Meeting notes, email exchanges. It's not everything, but it's enough to show you what you're walking into up there." I stared at the USB drive like it was a snake. "Why should I trust you? I don't even know your name." "Frank O'Connor, ma'am. I was a paralegal at Morrison and Associates for 15 years before they decided I knew too much about their side business." His mouth twisted bitterly. "I'm homeless now. Lost my apartment. Lost everything. But I still have my conscience. And what they're planning to do to you, it's not right. It's not legal. And it's not what your husband wanted." I looked at this stranger, this man who'd lost everything and was risking what little he had left to warn me. "What exactly are they planning?" Frank glanced around again before stepping slightly closer, lowering his voice. "They're going to present you with documents today claiming your husband changed his will in his final weeks. They have fake medical reports saying he was concerned about your mental state, your ability to manage money. They want to establish a trust with your son as trustee, but the real control would be with Vivian." "My son would never— David wouldn't— Does David know about the debt, Mrs. Thompson?" I blinked. "What debt?" Frank's expression turned even more grim. "Your daughter-in-law and son are nearly $500,000 in debt. Credit cards, business loans, a second mortgage on their house that David doesn't know about. Vivian's been hiding it from him. And when your husband got sick, she saw an opportunity." The garage seemed to tilt. I reached out to steady myself against the car, and Frank moved as if to help me, then stopped, seeming to remember that I didn't know him, had no reason to trust him. "I need to see those files," I heard myself say. Frank handed me the USB drive, and I noticed his hands were trembling too. "Ma'am, please be careful up there. They're not expecting you to know any of this. Don't let them pressure you into signing anything today. Read everything carefully. And whatever you do, don't let them convince you that your husband doubted you. He didn't. His original will, the real one, leaves everything to you, exactly the way you remember." An elevator dinged somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. Frank stepped back into the shadows between the cars. "Wait," I called out. "How do I know any of this is true? How do I know you're not the one trying to scam me?" He turned back, and in the harsh fluorescent light, I could see tears in his eyes. 3 years ago, my mother was scammed almost exactly like this. Different lawyers, same scheme. She lost everything and died in a state nursing facility, thinking her own son had abandoned her. I was drinking too much to help her, too proud to admit I'd failed her. His voice broke. When I saw Vivian's files, saw the same pattern, I couldn't let it happen again. Your husband was kind to me. Mrs. Thompson, when I used to beg outside this building before I got the paralegal job, he never walked past me without stopping. He talked to me like I was a person, not just a problem to step over. I owe him this. I owe you this. Before I could respond, he disappeared between the parked cars, and I was alone again in the cold concrete silence. I stood there for several minutes, clutching the USB drive, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything Frank had said as the paranoid rambling of a disturbed man. But something deeper, some instinct I didn't even know I possessed, was screaming that he was telling the truth. I thought about Vivian, sweet, helpful Vivian who'd been so attentive during Harold's illness. I thought about the little things I'd noticed over the years, things I'd dismissed as insignificant, but that now took on a darker cast. The way she'd whisper to David when I entered a room, their conversation cutting off abruptly. How she always seemed to steer family discussions away from me, talking over me, finishing my sentences. The subtle looks of irritation when I talked about Harold and our life together, as if our 43-year marriage was boring her. And then there were the comments, so small, so easy to dismiss. "Eleanor, didn't you already tell us that story?" When I hadn't. "David, your mother seems tired. Maybe we should go," before I'd shown any signs of fatigue. "I could have sworn you said Tuesday, Eleanor. Are you sure it was Wednesday?" Making me doubt my own memory of plans we'd made. With shaking hands, I got back into my car and plugged the USB drive into my phone adapter. There were dozens of files, PDFs, JPEGs, audio recordings. I opened the first document. Email exchange from Vivian Reed, viv.reed.thompson@gmail.com, to Richard Morrison, rmorrison@morrisonassociates.com. Date, 6 months ago. Subject, estate planning consultation. Richard, as we discussed, I need this handled delicately. Eleanor cannot suspect anything until everything is in place. How many incidents do you need documented to establish a pattern of incompetence? And can you recommend a doctor who would be willing to provide the necessary medical documentation? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I scrolled down to Morrison's response. Vivian, minimum of 6 to 8 documented incidents spanning at least 3 months. I have a colleague, Dr. Michael Stevens, who consults on these matters. His evaluation reports are very thorough and have never been challenged in court. His fee is $15,000, paid in cash. Once we have sufficient documentation, we can proceed with the trust establishment. Your total investment will be approximately $85,000, but given the size of the estate, $2.8 million, I'd say that's quite reasonable. I pushed open the car door and leaned out, gasping for air. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But there was more. So much more. Photographs of me, taken from a distance without my knowledge. Me at the grocery store captioned, "Subject appears confused about payment method. Takes several minutes to locate credit card." The truth? I'd been chatting with the cashier about her daughter's college plans while my groceries were being bagged. Me at the bank, captioned, "Subject required assistance from teller to complete deposit slip." The truth? The new deposit slips had a different format, and I'd asked where to write my account number. Me at David and Vivian's house, captioned, "Subject became agitated when unable to remember grandson's name." I don't have a grandson. They don't have children. But Vivian had introduced me to their neighbor's child, and when I'd forgotten the boy's name 5 minutes later, she'd made a big deal about it in front of David. There were medical records, completely fabricated, from this Dr. Michael Stevens, describing consultations that had never happened, diagnosing me with early-stage Alzheimer's disease with moderate cognitive impairment and episodes of confusion. And then I found the audio file labeled Morrison Reed Meeting, Final Planning Session. I pressed play. Vivian's voice came through, clear and cold. "So when do we tell Eleanor? When do we drop this bomb on her?" Morrison's voice, smooth and practiced. "We don't tell her anything. We present it as Harold's wishes. We have his amended will." "The forged will," Vivian interrupted. "The properly executed will," Morrison corrected, a note of warning in his voice. "Language matters, Vivian. You hired me because I know how to handle these situations. Eleanor will be presented with Harold's final wishes, supported by medical documentation of her declining mental state. She'll be upset, confused, possibly emotional. We use that. We position the trust as protection for her, something Harold wanted to make sure she was taken care of. And if she fights it, she won't. She's 64 years old, grieving, and we have documentation that she's mentally incompetent. Even if she tried to challenge it, by the time it got to court, we'd have so much evidence of her inability to manage her own affairs that no judge would rule in her favor. Vivian laughed. Actually laughed. God, when I think about her sitting on all that money doing nothing with it. She doesn't even travel. Doesn't spend money on anything except that damn garden and her book club. $2.8 million just sitting there while David and I are drowning. Well, in a few hours, that problem will be solved, Morrison said. The trust gives David control, with you as co-trustee advisor. You'll allocate Eleanor $45,000 per year for living expenses, quite generous actually, and the rest will be available to address your debts and investment needs. What about Harold's signature? Vivian asked. The will needs to sound like him. Already handled. We have samples of his signature from various documents. My associate Patricia is excellent at replication, and the medical records show he was heavily medicated during his final weeks, so any inconsistencies can be attributed to that. There was a pause, then Vivian spoke again, her voice softer. He figured it out, you know. Harold, about 3 weeks before he died. My heart stopped. What do you mean he figured it out? Morrison's voice had lost its smooth confidence. He confronted me at the hospital, said he knew I'd been meeting with lawyers, knew something was wrong. He said he was going to change everything, make sure Eleanor knew the truth, write me out completely. And? Morrison sounded nervous now. And he was in so much pain, Richard. The cancer had spread everywhere. The nurses showed me how to adjust his morphine drip if he needed more. He just went to sleep. And 3 days later, he was gone. The silence on the recording stretched out for several seconds. You're telling me you— I'm not telling you anything, Vivian said sharply. I'm saying my father-in-law was in terrible pain, and he received appropriate end-of-life care. That's all anyone needs to know. The recording ended. I sat in my car in that cold parking garage, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking. Harold had known. In his final weeks, when he was so sick, so vulnerable, he'd figured out what Vivian was planning. And she'd— what? Killed him? Hastened his death? Given him just enough extra morphine to make sure he never woke up to tell me the truth? My husband had died trying to protect me, and I hadn't known. I'd held his hand as he slipped away, thinking it was just the cancer, just the natural course of his illness. But he'd been trying to warn me, trying to save me, and she'd silenced him. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It burned away the grief, the confusion, the fear. In its place was something cold and hard and absolutely certain. Vivian thought I was a weak, confused old woman she could manipulate and control. She thought she could steal everything Harold and I had built together, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd wanted to leave me. She was wrong. I opened my phone and made a call. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Catherine Brooks. Katie, it's Eleanor Thompson. I need a favor, and I need it right now. Judge Catherine Brooks and I had taught together 30 years ago, before she went to law school. We'd stayed close, met for lunch once a month, attended each other's family celebrations. She'd been at Harold's funeral, had held me while I cried. Eleanor? What's wrong? You sound— I need you to listen carefully. I'm about to walk into a meeting where I believe people are going to try to defraud me. I'm going to record everything on my phone. If I text you the word help, I need you to call the police immediately and tell them to come to Morrison & Associates, 15th floor. My God, Eleanor, what's going on? I'll explain everything later. Can you do this for me? Of course I will. But Eleanor, if you're in danger, I'm not in physical danger. But Katie, they killed him. They killed Harold to keep him quiet, and now they're trying to take everything he left me. I heard her sharp intake of breath. I'm calling the police right now. No, not yet. I need to hear them say it. I need them to incriminate themselves. Just be ready, please. I'll be here. Eleanor, be careful. I ended the call and checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red from crying, but I dried them carefully, reapplied my lipstick. I took Harold's wedding ring from my purse. I'd been carrying it with me everywhere, and slipped it on my thumb for luck. I'm going to make this right, Harold, I whispered. I promise you, I'm going to make this right. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. I practiced in my mind what I would say, how I would act. I had to play this perfectly. One wrong move, and they'd know I was onto them. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the plush reception area of Morrison & Associates. Mahogany furniture, expensive artwork, thick carpet that muffled sound. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. Mrs. Thompson, they're waiting for you in conference room A. Thank you, dear. I kept my voice pleasant, grandmotherly. Just a nice old lady here to sign some papers. As I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor, I noticed how quiet everything was. Most of the office doors were closed. Through frosted glass, I could see shadowy figures moving, hear muted conversations. The whole place felt like a trap disguised as respectability. I paused outside conference room A, my hand on the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see several people seated around the large conference table. I recognized Vivian's silhouette immediately, petite, her distinctive hair pulled back in a tight bun. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The room was exactly as I'd expected. Intimidating. 3 people in expensive suits sat on one side of the massive table. Richard Morrison with his silver hair and cold eyes. Patricia Wells looking severe in a black suit. And a third person I didn't recognize. Youngish, wearing glasses with a doctor's serious demeanor. And there, on the other side of the table, was Vivian. She looked up as I entered, and for just a fraction of a second, so quick I almost missed it, I saw pure shock flash across her face. Fear, surprise, as if she hadn't actually expected me to show up. Then it was gone, replaced by that sweet smile I knew so well. Oh, Eleanor! She stood, came around the table to hug me. I forced myself not to recoil from her touch. I wasn't sure you'd remember about today. How are you feeling? The way she said it, the subtle emphasis on remember, the concerned tone that suggested I was the one with problems. It confirmed everything Frank had told me. I'm well, Vivian. Why wouldn't I remember? I kept my voice pleasant, slightly confused. This is about Harold's estate. Of course I'd be here. Morrison stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you. Please have a seat. We have several documents that require your signature today. I sat in the chair they'd left for me, positioned so I'd be facing all of them, alone on my side of the table. A power play. I'd taught high school literature for 30 years. I knew all about power dynamics. As I settled into my seat, I noticed Vivian fidgeting with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger repeatedly. Nervous habit. I'd seen her do it before, but I'd always thought it was just one of her quirks. Now I recognized it for what it was. A tell. Before we begin, I said, placing my purse firmly on the table and activating my phone's recording app hidden inside it. I'd like to understand exactly what we're discussing today. Harold and I went over his will many times. I'm very familiar with his wishes. Morrison and Patricia exchanged a quick glance. Patricia pulled a thick folder toward her. Mrs. Thompson, Morrison began, his voice taking on that practiced, patronizing tone people use with children and the elderly. There have been some recent developments. You see, Harold made certain amendments to his will during his final weeks. He expressed some concerns. Stop, I interrupted him, surprised at how firm my own voice sounded. What kind of concerns? Vivian leaned forward, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine worry. Eleanor, honey, Harold was worried about your health, about your memory. He mentioned several incidents to me where you seemed confused, forgetful. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of properly. Each word felt like a slap across my face, but I kept my expression neutral. Incidents? What incidents? The third person, the one I didn't know, spoke for the first time. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. James Sullivan. I'm a clinical psychologist who specializes in geriatric cognitive assessment. I consulted with your husband regarding your care. A lie. I'd never seen this man before in my life. And this wasn't the fabricated Dr. Michael Stevens from the files. This was a real person Morrison had brought in to add credibility. He slid a folder across the table toward me. We have documentation of several concerning episodes. Memory lapses, confusion about dates and names, difficulty managing household finances. With trembling hands, not from fear now, but from rage, I opened the folder. Inside were the same fabricated medical reports I'd seen on Frank's USB drive, the same twisted interpretations of innocent moments. I picked up one of the statements and read it aloud, my voice steady. October 15th. Subject became extremely agitated when asked about grocery shopping. She couldn't remember what she had purchased or how much money she had spent. When her son tried to help her organize her receipts, she accused him of trying to steal from her. I looked up at them. All three were watching me carefully, waiting to see how I'd react. This is completely false, I said quietly. I have never accused David of stealing anything. Eleanor. Vivian's voice was so soft, so pitying. You did say those things, honey. We were all very worried about you. That's why Harold decided he needed to make arrangements. I looked at this woman, this person I'd welcomed into my family, who'd sat at my dinner table countless times, who'd hugged me and called me Mom. The person looking back at me now was a complete stranger. What arrangements? I asked, even though I already knew. Morrison cleared his throat. Your husband amended his will to establish a trust. The estate would be managed by David as trustee, with Vivian as co-trustee advisor. You would receive a generous annual allowance for living expenses, and all major financial decisions would be handled by the trustees to protect you from the stress of managing such a large estate. The room seemed to tilt, but I gripped the edge of the table, steadying myself. You're telling me that Harold didn't trust me to handle my own finances? After 43 years of marriage? It wasn't about trust, Eleanor, Vivian said quickly, leaning forward with practiced concern. It was about protection. Harold loved you so much. He just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. And then she did it. She placed her hand on her stomach, a protective maternal gesture, and smiled that sweet smile. Besides, Eleanor, I have some wonderful news. I'm pregnant. 12 weeks. Harold would have been so thrilled to know he was going to be a grandfather. The phantom grandchild. The emotional manipulation was almost beautiful in its cruelty. The appeal to Harold's memory, the suggestion that refusing to sign these documents would somehow be betraying my husband's final wishes and harming my unborn grandchild. If I hadn't heard that recording, hadn't seen those files, I might have believed her. I might have signed everything they put in front of me, thinking I was doing what Harold wanted, protecting my grandchild's future. Instead, I looked at Vivian's hand on her stomach and felt nothing but cold, certain knowledge that she was lying. That's wonderful news, I said, injecting warmth into my voice. Harold would have been so happy. I paused, letting emotion crack through. I need to understand. Where do I sign? The relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. Morrison actually smiled, a genuine smile of triumph. Right here, Mrs. Thompson. Patricia Wells pushed several documents toward me, pointing with a perfectly manicured nail. And here, and initial here. I picked up the pen they'd provided, my hand hovering over the signature line. They all leaned forward slightly, anticipating victory. Then I set the pen down. Actually, before I sign anything, I'd like to call my son. David should be here for this, don't you think? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Eleanor, that's really not necessary, Vivian said quickly. We can tell David everything afterward. No, I think he should be here. I pulled out my phone. This is about his father's estate. He has a right to be present. Morrison's voice had lost its smooth confidence. Mrs. Thompson, your son is very busy. I'm sure then he can make time. I was already dialing. This will only take a moment. David answered on the second ring. Mom, is everything okay? David, honey, I'm at Morrison & Associates. We're having the final meeting about your father's estate. I really think you should be here for this. There was a pause. Now? Mom, I'm in the middle of— Please, David. I used the phrase Frank had suggested. It's about your father's wishes. I need you here. And bring those old photo albums we were looking at. The ones from the hospital. Another pause. Longer this time. David was smart. He'd understand something was wrong. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Thank you, sweetheart. I ended the call and smiled at the 3 people across from me. He's on his way. We can wait, can't we? The look Vivian gave me then, just for a second before she controlled it, was pure hatred. The 40 minutes we waited for David felt like 40 hours. Morrison tried 3 times to convince me to just go ahead and sign so we wouldn't waste David's time. Patricia Wells kept glancing at her watch, her jaw tightening with each passing minute. But it was Vivian who fascinated me. She'd pulled out her phone and was texting furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. I caught a glimpse of one message before she angled the phone away. Delete everything now. Everything all right, Vivian? I asked pleasantly. She looked up, startled, then composed her face into a smile. Oh yes. Just letting David know we're waiting for him. I know how hard it is for him to leave work in the middle of the day. Liar. I wondered who she was really texting. Morrison? Patricia? Someone else involved in this scheme? I excused myself to use the restroom, taking my purse with me. In the marble-tiled bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and pulled out my phone. The recording was still running. Good. I sent a quick text to Catherine Brooks. Standing by. May need you soon. Her response came immediately. Ready? Police on standby. Say the word. I splashed cold water on my face, studying myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the confused, grieving widow they expected. Harold used to say I had steel in my spine. You're tougher than you think, Ellie, he'd told me once when I was struggling with a difficult class of students. You just hide it under all that sweetness. Time to stop hiding it. When I returned to the conference room, I noticed something new on the table, a recording device, its small red light blinking steadily. Are you recording this meeting? I asked, settling back into my chair. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. It's standard practice for estate settlements, Mrs. Thompson, for everyone's protection. I see, and did you inform me of this recording when I arrived? Well, it's in the disclosure forms, which I haven't signed yet. I smiled sweetly. So you're recording a grieving widow without her explicit consent. I'm sure that's perfectly legal. Patricia Wells' mouth tightened into a thin line. Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, a soft knock interrupted her. The receptionist poked her head in. Mr. Morrison, there's someone here to see Mrs. Thompson. He says his name is Frank O'Connor and it's urgent. The reaction was instantaneous. Morrison's face went white. Patricia actually stood up from her chair, but it was Vivian's response that told me everything. She looked like she might vomit. I don't know anyone by that name, Morrison said quickly, his voice tight. Tell him we're in a meeting and… Actually, I said, standing up, I'd very much like to hear what Mr. O'Connor has to say. Eleanor, that's really not necessary, Vivian said, her voice higher than usual, almost panicked. We should just focus on getting through these documents. David will be here soon and… But it was too late. Frank appeared in the doorway, and I barely recognized him. He'd cleaned up somehow in the past hour. His face was freshly shaved, his hair combed back, and he was wearing what looked like his old work clothes, wrinkled but clean. In his hands was a large cardboard box. Mrs. Thompson, he said, nodding at me respectfully. Then he turned to Morrison, and his expression hardened. Richard? You're trespassing, Morrison said, standing up. I'm calling security. Go ahead, Frank said calmly, setting the box on the conference table with a heavy thud. But first, I think Mrs. Thompson should see what's in here, and maybe you'd like to explain to her why you fired me when I started asking questions about your estate restructuring services. He opened the box and began pulling out files. Dozens of them. Hundreds of pages. This, Frank said, holding up a document, is Harold Thompson's real will, dated 8 months before his death. Witnessed by Dr. Robert Hayes and Margaret Sullivan from your church, Mrs. Thompson. Everything goes to you. No trust, no restrictions. Just exactly what you and Harold agreed on. He placed it in front of me, and I recognized Harold's signature immediately. The real one, not whatever forgery they'd created. And this, Frank continued, pulling out another stack of papers, is the email chain between Vivian Reed and Richard Morrison, planning what they called the incompetency strategy. Would you like me to read some of the highlights? That's privileged attorney-client communication, Patricia Wells shouted. Actually, it's evidence of fraud, Frank said. He pulled out more documents. Here are the invoices showing that Morrison charged Vivian $85,000 for estate restructuring services. Here are the photographs Vivian took of Mrs. Thompson without her knowledge, with fabricated captions designed to make her look mentally incompetent. And here, he pulled out a small digital recorder, is the audio from your planning meeting 3 weeks ago. Morrison lunged for the recorder, but Frank stepped back smoothly. I have copies, Richard. Multiple copies stored in multiple locations. You taught me that yourself, remember? Always protect your evidence. Vivian stood up suddenly, swaying. I don't feel well. Sit down, Vivian, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. You're going to want to hear this. Frank pressed play on the recorder. Morrison's voice filled the room. The trust gives David control, with you as co-trustee advisor. You'll allocate Eleanor $45,000 per year for living expenses, quite generous actually, and the rest will be available to address your debts and investment needs. Then Vivian's voice, clear and cold. What about Harold's signature? The will needs to sound like him. Already handled. We have samples of his signature from various documents. My associate Patricia is excellent at replication. Patricia Wells made a small choking sound. Morrison had gone completely still, his face ashen. But Frank wasn't done. He let the recording continue to the part I'd heard in the parking garage. The part where Vivian talked about Harold figuring out their plan. The part where she described the morphine. He confronted me at the hospital, said he knew I'd been meeting with lawyers, knew something was wrong. He said he was going to change everything, make sure Eleanor knew the truth, write me out completely. And he was in so much pain, Richard. The cancer had spread everywhere. The nurses showed me how to adjust his morphine drip if he needed more. He just went to sleep, and 3 days later he was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat frozen in my chair, hearing for the second time my daughter-in-law describe how she'd potentially killed my husband. Vivian made a small whimpering sound and collapsed back into her chair, her face white as paper. Her hand dropped from her stomach, that protective maternal gesture she'd been using, and I noticed something. A slight ridge under her blouse, right at her waistline. Something that didn't quite sit naturally. Before I could process what I was seeing, the conference room door burst open. David stood in the doorway, his face flushed from running, his tie loosened. Mom, I got here as fast as I could. He stopped, taking in the scene. His mother, sitting alone on one side of the conference table. His wife, white-faced and shaking, on the other side with 2 lawyers who looked like they'd seen a ghost. And Frank O'Connor, standing over a box full of documents, holding a recording device. What the hell is going on? David asked. I looked at my son, this man I'd given birth to 35 years ago, raised, loved unconditionally. And I said the words that would change everything. Your wife has been trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so she can steal your father's estate. David's eyes went from me to Vivian. That's insane. Vivian, tell her that's insane. Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came out. It's true, David, Frank said quietly. I have the evidence. Emails, recordings, invoices. She's been planning this for months. David turned to Morrison. Mr. Morrison, you're our family lawyer. Tell them this is some kind of misunderstanding. Morrison said nothing. He was staring at the recorder in Frank's hand like it was a loaded gun. David, I said gently, your wife and I need to have a conversation, and you need to hear it. I turned to Frank. Is there more on that recording? Yes, ma'am, about 15 more minutes. Play it all. What followed was the most excruciating quarter hour of my life. We sat in that conference room and listened to Vivian and Morrison plan every detail of their scheme. The fake medical reports, the staged incidents, the carefully crafted narrative of my declining mental state, and the debt, the massive hidden debt that was the real reason for everything. We're $480,000 in debt. Your firm is bleeding money. We're 3 months from bankruptcy. David's face went from confused to shocked to devastated. That's impossible. I see our accounts every month. We're fine. We're more than fine. Frank pulled another document from his box. She's been keeping 2 sets of books. Secret credit cards, a second mortgage on your house that she took out without your knowledge, investment losses she hid from you. He laid it out on the table. $180,000 in credit card debt spread across 7 cards David didn't know about. A $200,000 loan against their house. $100,000 in losses from day trading that Vivian had been doing secretly. David sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his hands shaking. "Vivian, is this true?" She finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to fix it. I was trying to save us. You were so proud, David. You wouldn't ask your parents for help even when the firm started struggling. I thought if we could just get the inheritance, we could pay everything off. Start fresh." "By destroying my mother?" David's voice broke. "By making her think Dad lost faith in her? She doesn't need $2.8 million, Vivian suddenly shouted, her composure shattering completely. "She lives in that same house, drives that same car, spends money on nothing except books and her garden. That money would just sit there while we lost everything." The mask was completely off now. This was the real Vivian, resentful, entitled, desperate. "That money," I said quietly, "was 43 years of my husband's life. Every overtime shift he worked, every promotion he earned, every dollar he saved so that I could live comfortably after he was gone." "Comfortably?" Vivian laughed bitterly. "You don't even know what struggling feels like. You've never had to choose between paying the mortgage and buying groceries. You've never had to lie awake at night wondering if tomorrow's the day you lose everything." "You're right," I said. "I don't know what that feels like, but I know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone I trusted, someone I welcomed into my family, someone I loved like a daughter." Vivian flinched as if I'd struck her. David stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the city. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The pregnancy, Vivian. Tell me that part's real. Tell me we're really having a baby." Vivian's hand went to her stomach again, that protective gesture. But I was watching closely now, and I saw what I'd noticed before, that slight ridge at her waistline. "Vivian," I said softly, "stand up." "What?" "Stand up. Let David see." "I don't have to. You can't just—" "Please," David said, turning from the window. "Vivian, just please." She stood slowly, her hand still on her stomach. David walked toward her, his eyes searching her face. Then his gaze dropped to her midsection, and I saw the moment he noticed it too, the slight unnaturalness, the way her blouse bunched oddly at the waist. "Vivian," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "Lift your shirt." "David, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to—" "Lift your shirt." For a long moment they stood frozen, staring at each other. Then Vivian's shoulders slumped. She reached down and pulled up her blouse. Underneath was a silicone pregnancy belly, the kind actresses wear in movies, strapped around her waist with elastic bands. David made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a gasp and a sob. He stumbled backward, hitting the conference table. "There is no baby," I said. Not a question, a statement. Vivian pulled her shirt down, fresh tears streaming down her face. I was going to get pregnant. I just needed time. I needed the money situation resolved first, so I could stop worrying, so we could actually afford— "You lied about being pregnant," David said, his voice flat with shock. "You wore a fake belly. You were going to— What? Fake a miscarriage in a few months? Tell everyone we lost the baby?" "I was buying time," Vivian screamed. "Eleanor's emotional about grandchildren. I thought if she believed there was a baby, she'd be more likely to sign away her rights," I finished. "More likely to let you steal everything my husband left me." A knock at the door interrupted us. The receptionist poked her head in, looking frightened. "Mr. Morrison, there's a Detective Sarah Williams here. She says she needs to speak with everyone in this room." Morrison's face went from white to green. "Tell her we're in a meeting and—" "I'm afraid that won't work, Richard," said a woman's voice from the hallway. Detective Sarah Williams stepped into the room, her badge clearly visible. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. Behind her were 2 uniformed officers. "Mrs. Thompson called me," she said, looking at me. "She said she might need assistance with a fraud investigation." I pulled out my phone, still recording. "I have evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. And possibly—" I looked at Vivian. "Possibly something more serious involving my husband's death." Detective Williams' expression sharpened. "I'm going to need everyone to stay seated. No one leaves this room until I've taken statements from each of you." The next 3 hours were a blur. Detective Williams listened to the recordings, examined the documents Frank had brought, took detailed notes as I explained everything that had happened. David sat in shock, barely speaking. Vivian alternated between crying and stony silence. Morrison and Patricia Wells both demanded lawyers. But there was one more revelation to come. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Williams said, pulling me aside while her officers kept watch over the others. "The recording where Mrs. Reed discusses your husband's morphine levels. I'm going to need to investigate that further. I'd like your permission to request an exhumation order." The words stopped me cold. You think she actually... "I think we need to rule it out," Williams said gently. "The medical examiner will be able to tell us if the morphine levels in your husband's system were consistent with standard end-of-life care, or if they were excessive." I looked across the room at Vivian, who was staring at her hands. "Do it," I said. "I need to know. Harold deserves the truth." As Detective Williams made phone calls, arranging for the exhumation order and coordinating with the district attorney's office, Frank approached me quietly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I want you to know, this wasn't easy for me. Coming forward, Morrison gave me my first real job after I got out of rehab. He helped me when I had nothing." "Then why did you do it?" I asked. His eyes filled with tears. "Because 3 years ago my mother was scammed exactly like this. Different lawyers, same scheme. She died thinking her family had abandoned her, that her own son had stolen from her. I was too drunk, too broken to help her. I failed her completely." He wiped his eyes roughly. "When I saw Vivian's files, saw the same pattern, I couldn't let it happen again. Your husband was kind to me, Mrs. Thompson. When I was begging outside this building, before Morrison gave me the paralegal job, Mr. Thompson never walked past without stopping. He'd talk to me like I was a person. He gave me $20 once and said, 'This is for food, friend, not for alcohol. You're worth more than that.'" Nobody had talked to me like that in years. I took Frank's hand. "Thank you. You saved my life. You know that, don't you?" "No, ma'am. I just made sure the truth came out. You saved yourself." David finally approached, his face ravaged with grief and shock. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know about any of this." "I know, sweetheart. But I should have known. I should have questioned it when Vivian started mentioning that you were forgetful. I should have trusted you more than I trusted her." His voice broke. "I'm so sorry. David, she manipulated you. She's good at it. That's what predators do." "She's my wife," he said, and started crying. "She's my wife, and she tried to destroy you. She killed Dad. She killed him, Mom." I held my son while he sobbed, this grown man who'd been turned into a weapon against his own mother without even knowing it. Detective Williams approached us. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need to ask you some questions. But first I need to know, were you aware of any of your wife's activities regarding your mother's estate?" David wiped his eyes. "No, I swear I wasn't. Vivian told me that Dad was worried about Mom's memory, that he wanted to set up a trust to protect her. She said it was what Dad wanted, that the lawyers had documents showing he'd changed his will. I thought..." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I thought I was helping protect you, Mom. I thought this was what Dad wanted." "Did you know about the debt?" Williams asked. "Some of it, maybe 50, 60,000. I knew things were tight, but I had no idea it was nearly $500,000. I thought we were managing." Williams made notes. "And the pregnancy?" David's face crumpled again. "I thought, God, I was so happy. We'd been trying for 2 years. When she told me she was finally pregnant, I thought it was the one good thing in all this mess." Vivian suddenly stood up. "I want to make a statement." Her lawyer, who'd arrived 20 minutes ago, put his hand on her arm. "Mrs. Reed, I strongly advise you not to..." "I'm done lying," Vivian said. She looked directly at me, and for the first time I saw something like genuine remorse in her eyes. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. I let desperation turn me into someone I don't even recognize." "You killed my husband," I said quietly. I adjusted his morphine. He was in so much pain. He was going to die anyway within days. But yes, I hastened it, because he was going to tell you everything and I couldn't let that happen." The room went silent. Even her lawyer looked shocked. Detective Williams spoke carefully. "Mrs. Reed, I'm going to read you your rights now. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Williams read Vivian her Miranda rights, I watched David's face. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. His wife, his marriage, his life as he knew it, all of it crumbling in the space of a few hours. "Mrs. Thompson," Williams said, "I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement, and we'll need all of these documents and recordings as evidence. Of course, I should warn you, this is going to be a long investigation. Fraud cases are complicated, and if we're looking at potential manslaughter charges related to your husband's death, it could take months." "I have time," I said, "and I have Harold's memory to protect." 3 weeks later, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Harold and I had eaten breakfast together for 43 years. The exhumation results had come back. Harold's morphine levels in his final hours were 3 times the therapeutic dose. Given his terminal condition, the medical examiner said it could be interpreted as either appropriate end-of-life pain management or deliberate overdose. But there was a note in the hospital records. The nurse on duty had written, "Mrs. Reed requested instruction on adjusting the morphine drip. Patient's wife not present. Showed DIL how to increase dosage if patient showed signs of severe pain." Vivian had increased that dosage. Whether it was to end Harold's suffering or to silence him before he could expose her scheme, we might never know for certain. The district attorney said it would be difficult to prosecute as murder. Harold was dying anyway, and Vivian could claim she was simply helping manage his pain. But I knew the truth, and so did David. My son had moved out of the house he shared with Vivian the day after the conference room confrontation. He was living in a small apartment downtown, trying to piece together who he was without her manipulation guiding his every thought. "I keep wondering how much of my life was real," he told me over coffee one morning. "Every memory, every decision, was that me or was that her telling me what to think?" It was a question I understood all too well. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Frank O'Connor standing on my porch. He'd cleaned up even more since that day, clean-shaven, hair trimmed, wearing clothes that actually fit. "Frank," I said, opening the door, "this is a surprise." "Mrs. Thompson, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to update you on something." I invited him in, offered him coffee. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Harold used to sit, and told me his news. "Detective Williams's investigation has uncovered something bigger than just your case," he said. "Morrison and Associates has been running this scam for years. They've identified at least 6 other families who were targeted the same way." 6? I felt sick. Maybe more. Williams is going through all of Morrison's files now. They're building a RICO case. That's racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. It means they're treating it like organized crime. "Good," I said fiercely. "They destroyed families. They destroyed lives." Frank nodded. "Mrs. Thompson, there's something else. One of the other victims. Her name was Dorothy O'Connor. She was my mother." I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "Morrison did this to your mother?" 5 years ago. Different scheme, but same basic pattern. They convinced my sister that Mom was incompetent, set up a trust, took most of the estate in legal fees. By the time I sobered up enough to realize what had happened, Mom was dead, and the money was gone." His voice was thick with emotion. "I got the paralegal job at Morrison's firm because I wanted to understand how it worked, how they got away with it. I was gathering evidence when I saw Vivian's files and realized they were doing it again." "So you've been planning this for 5 years?" "Not planning, just waiting for the right moment. When they fired me, I knew I had to act fast. If I didn't warn you, you'd sign those papers, and it would all be over." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You saved me, Frank. You saved my life and Harold's memory." "No, ma'am. I just gave you the information. You saved yourself. You were strong enough to fight back." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 people whose lives had been shattered by the same predators, brought together by the need for justice. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Williams has offered me a job as a consultant on the investigation. She says my knowledge of Morrison's systems will be invaluable, and the district attorney wants me to testify." "That's wonderful, Frank." He smiled, but it was sad. "I'm also back in AA. 90 meetings in 90 days. I let alcohol destroy my life once. I won't let it happen again." After Frank left, I walked through my house, this home Harold and I had built together. The living room where we'd watched our son grow up. The kitchen where we'd shared countless meals. The bedroom where Harold had died, or been killed, depending on how you looked at it. My phone rang. It was David. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Always? Can you ever forgive me? Really forgive me?" I thought about it. Truly thought about it. Could I forgive my son for doubting me? For being manipulated into participating in a scheme that could have destroyed my life? "Yes," I said. "I can forgive you, David, because I believe you were a victim too. Vivian used your love for me against both of us. But I should have known better. I should have trusted you more." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and we can't change that. What we can do is build something better going forward." "What does that look like?" "It looks like honesty. Complete honesty. It looks like you coming to me when you're struggling instead of trying to handle everything alone. It looks like us rebuilding trust one conversation at a time." There was a long pause, then, "I'd like that, Mom. I'd really like that." After we hung up, I sat in Harold's chair, the big recliner by the window where he used to read the newspaper every morning. I'd barely been able to look at it since he died, but now I settled into it, feeling the worn leather conform to my body. "I did it, Harold," I whispered to the empty room. "I fought back. I protected everything you left me, and I'm making sure they never do this to anyone else." The afternoon sun streamed through the window, warming my face, and for the first time since Harold's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. The trial was set to begin in 6 months. Morrison, Patricia Wells, and Vivian would all face charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Frank's documents, the recordings, the testimony from other victims who were finally brave enough to come forward. But there was work to do before then. Families to notify. Other victims to support. A system to fix so this could never happen again. I thought about calling Catherine Brooks, seeing if she had any contacts in the state legislature. Someone needed to write laws with teeth, laws that protected vulnerable seniors from predatory estate planning practices. The Eleanor Thompson Act. It had a nice ring to it. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Dorothy Brennan's family just came forward. That makes victim number 7. They want to meet you. You gave them courage to speak up." I smiled. Harold would have liked that. He'd always said that the strongest people weren't the ones who never fell down. They were the ones who got back up and helped others do the same. Outside my window, I could see the garden Harold and I had planted together 20 years ago. The roses needed pruning. The flower beds were overgrown. I'd been too grief-stricken to maintain it since his death. But tomorrow, I thought, I'll start working on it again. I'll bring it back to life, just like I'm bringing myself back to life. I wasn't just Harold's widow anymore. I wasn't just a victim of a cruel scheme. I was Eleanor Thompson, survivor, fighter. Detective Williams had warned me the investigation would take months. "Are you prepared for that, Mrs. Thompson?" she'd asked. I looked at David, sitting broken in my kitchen. At Frank, determined to make amends. At the evidence spread across my table. "I've been preparing my whole life," I said. "I just didn't know it until now." The trial was still months away, but I was ready, and I had work to do. 6 months later, I stood in that same bedroom where I'd prepared for the estate meeting, the meeting that had changed everything. But the woman in the mirror was different now. Stronger, steadier, ready for the final battle. Today, the trial would begin. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my charcoal gray suit. Harold had always said this color made me look powerful. "Like a woman who doesn't take any nonsense," he'd joked. I needed that power today. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "I'm outside. Ready when you are." Frank O'Connor had become an unexpected constant in my life over these past months. After Detective Williams hired him as a consultant on the case, he'd thrown himself into the investigation with the intensity of a man seeking redemption. He'd helped identify 9 families, 9, that Morrison and Associates had victimized over the past 8 years. 9 families who'd lost millions to fraudulent estate planning schemes. But Frank had done more than just work the case. He'd become a friend. He'd been there when I'd break down crying at 3 a.m, when the weight of everything would crush down on me. He'd been there when David would call, drunk and sobbing about his failed marriage. He'd been there when the nightmares came. Visions of Harold dying alone while Vivian adjusted his morphine drip, silencing him forever. I grabbed my purse and headed downstairs. Frank was waiting in the driveway, looking almost unrecognizable from the homeless man who'd approached me in that parking garage. Clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a suit that actually fit. 3 months sober, attending AA meetings every day. "You ready for this, Mrs. T?" he asked as I got into his car. He'd started calling me that a few months ago, and I'd stopped correcting him. It felt right somehow. Familiar. As ready as I'll ever be. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. We both knew what today meant. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Martinez, had warned me that trials were unpredictable. "We have overwhelming evidence," she'd said. "But juries can be sympathetic to defendants, especially when they present themselves as desperate rather than criminal. Be prepared for Vivian's lawyers to paint her as a victim of her own desperation." The courthouse was already swarming with reporters when we arrived. The case had attracted significant media attention. Daughter-in-law's deadly inheritance plot made for compelling headlines. I kept my head down as Frank guided me through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions. "Mrs. Thompson, how do you feel about your daughter-in-law? Do you believe she murdered your husband? Will you forgive her if she's convicted?" Inside the courthouse, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. David was waiting for me on a bench outside the courtroom, his head in his hands. When he looked up and saw me, I saw how much these 6 months had aged him. He'd lost weight, his face was drawn, and there were deep circles under his eyes. "Mom," he said, standing to hug me, "I wasn't sure you'd want me here." "Of course I want you here. You're my son. I'm also the reason this happened. If I hadn't married her, if I'd been paying attention to my own finances instead of letting her handle everything—" "David, stop. You were manipulated by a very skilled predator. That's not your fault." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "I've been in therapy, 3 times a week. Dr. Patterson says I have what she calls trauma bonding, that Vivian systematically isolated me from you and Dad, made me dependent on her for emotional support, then used that dependence to control my perceptions." "That sounds right. But Mom, I let her. I chose to believe her when she said you were getting forgetful. I chose to think Dad would really change his will without talking to me about it. You chose to trust your wife. That's what marriage is supposed to be about." The courtroom doors opened and people began filing in. I saw Vivian's parents in the crowd. They'd flown in from Ohio, looking shell-shocked and elderly. They'd called me once, weeks ago, to apologize. "We had no idea," Vivian's mother had sobbed. "She was always such a good girl. We don't know what happened to her." But I knew what had happened. Desperation, greed, and a willingness to destroy anyone who stood in the way of what she wanted. Morrison and Patricia Wells were already seated at the defense table with their lawyers. Morrison looked diminished somehow, his silver hair now showing gray roots, his expensive suit hanging loose. He'd aged a decade in 6 months. Patricia sat ramrod straight, her face an expressionless mask. And then Vivian was brought in. Nothing could have prepared me for how she looked. The vibrant, pretty young woman who'd married my son was gone. In her place was someone pale and gaunt, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a simple blue dress that hung on her too thin frame. She looked like she'd been crying for months. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Shame? Regret? Or just fear of what was coming? Judge Henry Patterson entered, and we all stood. Katie Brooks had recused herself from the case, of course. Our friendship made that necessary. But she'd recommended Judge Patterson, a man known for his fairness and his intolerance for elder abuse cases. "Please be seated," Judge Patterson said. His voice was deep and commanding. "We're here today for the trial of Vivian Reed, Richard Morrison, and Patricia Wells on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and in Mrs. Reed's case, voluntary manslaughter in the death of Harold Thompson." The words hung in the air. Voluntary manslaughter. They'd decided not to pursue first-degree murder charges. Jennifer Martinez had explained that proving intent would be too difficult. But manslaughter, the killing of another person through reckless or negligent behavior, that they could prove. "Ms. Martinez, your opening statement, please." Jennifer Martinez stood, and I was struck again by how young she looked. Barely 40, with kind eyes that belied the steel in her voice. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about the worst kind of betrayal. The betrayal of trust, of family, of the vulnerable by those who should protect them." She walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. Eleanor Thompson is 64 years old. She was married to Harold Thompson for 43 years. Together, they built a life, raised a son, saved for their retirement. When Harold was diagnosed with terminal cancer, Eleanor cared for him through his final months with devotion and love. Martinez paused, letting that sink in. But someone else was watching Harold die too. Someone who saw his death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. Vivian Reed, Harold's daughter-in-law, was drowning in debt, nearly $500,000 that she'd hidden from her husband. When Harold got sick, she saw a way out. She conspired with attorney Richard Morrison and his associate Patricia Wells to steal Harold Thompson's estate through an elaborate fraud scheme. She walked back to the prosecution table and picked up a thick folder. They fabricated medical records claiming Eleanor was mentally incompetent. They created false statements from witnesses. They forged Harold's signature on a new will. And when Harold discovered what they were doing and threatened to expose them, she paused dramatically. Vivian Reed ensured he never got the chance to tell his wife the truth. She increased his morphine drip to fatal levels and let him die, believing she'd gotten away with it. Gone. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Vivian was crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. But she didn't get away with it, Martinez continued. Because of the courage of Frank O'Connor, a paralegal at Morrison's firm who risked everything to warn Eleanor. Because of Eleanor's strength in fighting back when it would have been easier to just sign the papers and accept what they told her. And because the truth, ladies and gentlemen, always finds a way out. She returned to her seat. We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these 3 defendants conspired to commit fraud, to abuse a vulnerable senior citizen, and in Vivian Reed's case, to commit manslaughter. Thank you. Richard Morrison's defense attorney stood next. His name was Charles Whitmore, no relation to Harold's family, despite the similar name. And he was one of those lawyers who looked like he'd been born in a 3-piece suit. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. My client, Richard Morrison, is a respected attorney who has practiced law in this city for 30 years. He has helped hundreds of families navigate the complex world of estate planning. Did he make mistakes in this case? Perhaps. Did he fail to adequately verify the information provided by his client, Mrs. Reed? Possibly. But did he conspire to commit fraud? Absolutely not. I felt Frank tense beside me. This was the strategy we'd been warned about. Shift the blame entirely to Vivian, paint Morrison as a dupe rather than a co-conspirator. My client was presented with medical documentation that appeared legitimate. He was told by Mrs. Reed that Harold Thompson had expressed concerns about his wife's mental state. He acted on the information he was given. The fault here lies not with Richard Morrison, but with Vivian Reed, who manipulated everyone around her, including my client, to achieve her goals. Vivian's lawyer was next. Sandra Bennett was a public defender who looked exhausted before the trial even began. Your Honor, members of the jury, she said quietly. What Vivian Reed did was wrong. We're not going to dispute that. She made terrible choices driven by desperation and fear. But this is not a case of a cold-blooded killer. This is a case of a young woman who found herself drowning in debt, watching everything she'd worked for slip away, and made choices she will regret for the rest of her life. She gestured to Vivian, who was still crying. Mrs. Reed will testify about the mounting pressure she felt, the shame of hiding their financial situation from her husband, the panic that set in when she realized they were going to lose everything. She will tell you about Harold Thompson's final days, about how much pain he was in, about how his own doctor had told the family to keep him comfortable. She will tell you that when she increased his morphine, she was trying to help him, not silence him. I felt David's hand reach for mine and squeeze it tight. This was the hardest part for him, hearing his wife's actions defended, rationalized, made to seem almost understandable. We're not asking you to excuse what Mrs. Reed did, Sandra continued. We're asking you to see her as a flawed human being who made terrible mistakes, not a calculating murderer. Thank you. The first day of testimony was brutal. Jennifer Martinez called Dr. Robert Hayes, Harold's oncologist, to the stand. Dr. Hayes, Martinez asked, can you describe Harold Thompson's mental state in the weeks before his death? Harold was sharp as a tack until about 5 days before he passed, Hayes said, his voice heavy with emotion. Harold had been his patient for 15 years. He was in significant physical pain, yes, but mentally he was completely lucid. We had conversations about literature, He was reading Hemingway. He asked me about my daughter's college plans. He made jokes with the nurses. Did he ever express concerns about his wife's mental state? Never, not once. In fact, he spoke often about how grateful he was for Eleanor's support, how strong she was through his illness. Did he ever discuss changing his will? No. The only time he mentioned his will was about 3 weeks before he died. He asked me to witness a document, said he wanted to make sure everything was in order. I witnessed his signature on what I now know was his original will, leaving everything to Eleanor. Martinez pulled out a document. Is this the will you witnessed, Dr. Hayes? Hayes examined it. Yes, that's Harold's signature, and that's mine as a witness. Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Whitmore's cross-examination tried to establish that Harold had been on pain medication and might have been confused, but Hayes shut that down quickly. Harold was on morphine for pain management, yes, but at therapeutic doses. He was not confused or impaired. He knew exactly what he was doing. The second witness was the nurse who'd been on duty the night Harold died. Her name was Rebecca Sullivan, and she looked terrified to be there. Nurse Sullivan, Martinez said gently, can you tell us what happened on the night of Harold Thompson's death? Rebecca twisted her hands together. Mrs. Reed, Vivian, came to me around 9 p.m. She said Harold was in terrible pain, that he was moaning and seemed uncomfortable. She asked me to show her how to adjust his morphine drip if the pain got worse during the night. And did you show her? Yes. Rebecca's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I shouldn't have. It's against protocol. But she seemed so concerned, and Mrs. Thompson, Eleanor, had gone home to rest for the first time in days. I thought Vivian was trying to help. What were Harold's morphine levels that night? He was on a standard drip of 2 milligrams per hour. That's normal for end-stage cancer patients. And what did the autopsy show his levels were when he died? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. 6 milligrams per hour, triple the prescribed dose. Could that amount kill him? Given his weakened state, yes. It would suppress his respiratory system. He would essentially stop breathing. The courtroom was silent. I watched Vivian, who had her head bowed, shoulders shaking with sobs. Nurse Sullivan, Martinez continued, in your professional opinion, was Harold Thompson in immediate danger of dying that night without the increased morphine? No. He was dying, yes, but he could have had days, possibly even a week or more. The cancer was aggressive, but he was stable that night. Thank you, Nurse Sullivan. When court adjourned for the day, I felt emptied, hollowed. Hearing the clinical details of Harold's death, understanding exactly how Vivian had done it, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. David drove me home. Frank had to meet with Jennifer Martinez about his testimony the next day. We rode in silence until David finally spoke. I loved her, Mom. I really loved her. I know you did. How did I not see it? How did I marry someone capable of that? Because people hide who they really are, David. Especially when they're desperate. He pulled into my driveway but didn't turn off the engine. Dr. Patterson asked me something yesterday. She asked if I thought I could ever trust anyone again. What did you tell her? I said I didn't know. He looked at me, his eyes haunted. How do you learn to trust again after something like this? Slowly, carefully, by starting with people who've earned it. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You can trust me, David. No matter what happened, no matter what choices you made, you can always trust me. He broke down then, crying like he'd been holding it in for months. I held my son in the driveway of my house, the house where he grew up, and let him grieve for the life he'd lost. The second day of the trial began with Frank's testimony. I watched him walk to the stand, looking nervous but determined. He'd been sober for 4 months now, and it showed in his steady gait, his clear eyes. Mr. O'Connor, Martinez began, can you tell the jury about your employment at Morrison & Associates? I worked there as a paralegal for 15 years. I was good at my job. I knew their filing systems, their clients, their procedures better than almost anyone. What led to your termination? Frank took a deep breath. I started noticing a pattern. Certain clients would come in for estate planning, and within months there would be questions about the elderly person's competency, medical evaluations that seemed questionable, wills being changed at the last minute. I started asking questions, and Morrison told me to mind my own business. What happened then? I started making copies, just little things at first. A concerning email here, a suspicious invoice there. When Vivian Reed's file came across my desk, all the red flags were there. Meetings where she discussed her debt, communications about establishing incompetency, references to the package. That's what they called the collection of fake medical records and witness statements. Why didn't you go to the police immediately? Frank's voice cracked slightly. Because I'd failed someone before. My mother was scammed by a different firm using a similar scheme, and I was too drunk to help her. She died thinking I'd abandoned her. When I saw what was happening to Mrs. Thompson, I knew I couldn't fail again. But I also knew that without hard evidence, without catching them in the act, they'd just deny everything. So what did you do? I waited until I had everything I needed. Then Morrison fired me. He'd figured out I was asking too many questions. But by then, I had copies of everything. I waited in that parking garage for 3 hours, hoping to catch Mrs. Thompson before the meeting. I had to warn her. Whitmore's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint Frank as a disgruntled employee, an alcoholic with a grudge, someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted. Mr. O'Connor, isn't it true that you've struggled with alcoholism for years? Yes. And isn't it true that you were fired from several previous jobs due to drinking? Yes. So why should this jury believe anything you say? You're a drunk who was fired and wanted revenge on his former employer. Frank looked Whitmore directly in the eye. I am an alcoholic. I've been sober for 4 months, 1 day at a time. I was fired from Morrison's firm because I knew too much about their criminal activities, and I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. There's a difference. The moment shifted. I could see it in the jury's faces. Frank's honesty, his refusal to make excuses for himself, had given him credibility that Whitmore's attacks couldn't undermine. Next came the testimony I'd been dreading most, mine. Jennifer Martinez led me through the basics, my marriage to Harold, our life together, his illness and death. Then she asked me about Vivian. Mrs. Thompson, when did you first suspect something was wrong? I didn't, not until Frank warned me. Vivian had been so perfect, so helpful during Harold's illness. If Frank hadn't shown me those files, I would have walked into that meeting completely unprepared. How did you feel when you learned what Vivian had planned? I had to pause, gathering my composure. Betrayed. Violated. She didn't just try to steal money. She tried to steal my memories. She wanted me to believe that Harold, the man who loved me for 43 years, had died thinking I was incompetent. That's a cruelty I can't even fully describe. Can you tell the jury about the impact this has had on your life? I don't sleep well anymore. I have nightmares about Harold's last days, wondering if he tried to tell me what was happening, if I missed signs. I question my own memories now. Was that conversation real, or am I forgetting something? Vivian made me doubt my own mind, and even though I know the truth now, that doubt lingers. I looked directly at the jury. But the worst part is knowing that Harold died trying to protect me, and I didn't even know he was in danger. She silenced him. She took away his last chance to tell me the truth. That's what I'll never forgive. Sandra Bennett's cross-examination was surprisingly gentle. Mrs. Thompson, you loved your son's wife, didn't you? I thought I did. I loved who I thought she was. And you wanted the best for your son and his family? Of course. If Vivian and David had simply come to you and asked for help with their debts, would you have helped them? I thought about it. Yes. If they'd been honest, if they'd asked, Harold and I would have helped. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. No further questions. It was a smart move. Sandra was setting up Vivian's testimony, establishing that the tragedy could have been avoided if Vivian had just asked for help instead of trying to steal. On the third day, Vivian took the stand. She'd lost even more weight since I'd last seen her. Her wedding ring, David's grandmother's ring, was gone from her finger. She looked small and broken in the witness box. Sandra Bennett walked her through the basics, her marriage to David, their early financial struggles, the mounting debt she'd hidden from him. Why didn't you tell David about the debt? Sandra asked. I was ashamed, Vivian said, her voice barely audible. His architecture firm was struggling and I was supposed to be helping. But I was terrible with money. I kept thinking I could fix it before he found out. I took out credit cards to pay off other credit cards. I borrowed against the house. I tried day trading to make quick money and lost everything. And it just kept getting worse. When did you first think about the inheritance? Vivian's eyes filled with tears. When Harold got his diagnosis, David was so worried about his dad, so focused on being there for his parents. And I thought, after Harold dies, Eleanor will get everything. She'll be fine. She doesn't even spend money. And we're drowning. How did you meet Richard Morrison? At a charity event. I was complaining to someone about how unfair it was that some people had so much money they didn't even use it while others were losing everything. Morrison overheard. He said he helped families in complicated situations. He made it sound so reasonable. What did he propose? He said that sometimes elderly people needed protection from themselves. That if we could establish that Eleanor wasn't capable of managing money, we could set up a trust that would protect her while making sure the money was used productively. He made it sound like we'd be helping her. Did you believe that? Vivian was crying harder now. At first, maybe, but I knew. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. I couldn't see any other way out. Tell the jury about Harold's morphine. Vivian took a shaky breath. Harold was in so much pain. The cancer had spread everywhere. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The doctor said it was just a matter of time. And then he figured out what I was doing. He'd overheard me on the phone with Morrison. He confronted me at the hospital, said he was going to tell Eleanor everything, change his will back, make sure I never got anything. What did you do? I panicked. If he told Eleanor, everything would come out. The debt, the lies, everything. And he was so angry, so disappointed in me. He said I'd betrayed his trust, his son's trust, Eleanor's trust. He was going to destroy my marriage. So you increased his morphine. He was in pain, Vivian almost shouted. He was dying anyway. The nurse had shown me how to adjust it. I wanted him to stop hurting. I wanted him to stop looking at me with that disappointment in his eyes. I wanted it to be over. The courtroom was silent. Did you intend to kill him? No, I wanted him to go to sleep. I wanted the pain to stop. His pain and mine. I didn't realize how much I'd increased it. I just turned the dial and walked away. Jennifer Martinez's cross-examination was devastating. Mrs. Reed, you testified that you wanted Harold's pain to stop, but wasn't the real reason you increased his morphine to stop him from telling his wife the truth? No, you'd spent months planning this fraud. You'd paid Morrison $85,000. Money you didn't have, borrowed money, to help you steal Eleanor's inheritance. And when Harold threatened to expose you, you killed him. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? You testified that Harold said he was going to tell Eleanor everything. That would have ruined all your plans, wouldn't it? Yes, and you couldn't let that happen. So you waited until you were alone with him, and you tripled his morphine dose. I was trying to help him. Help him die before he could tell the truth, you mean? Objection. Sandra Bennett jumped up. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Patterson said. Miss Martinez, rephrase. Mrs. Reed, the medical examiner testified that Harold Thompson could have lived another week with proper care. By increasing his morphine to fatal levels, you took that week away from him. You took away his chance to say goodbye to his wife. You took away his chance to tell the truth. Isn't that correct? Vivian was sobbing. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But you did hurt people, didn't you? You hurt Eleanor. You hurt David. You hurt your own parents, who are sitting in this courtroom watching their daughter on trial for manslaughter. And most of all, you hurt Harold, a man who welcomed you into his family and died without being able to protect his wife from you. I know, Vivian screamed. I know what I did. I have to live with it every day. Don't you think I regret it? Don't you think I wish I could take it back? Regret doesn't bring Harold Thompson back, Martinez said quietly. No further questions. The closing arguments came 2 days later, after additional testimony from other Morrison victims and handwriting experts who confirmed the forged signatures. Jennifer Martinez stood before the jury one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, this case comes down to a simple question. Do we protect the vulnerable, or do we make excuses for those who prey on them? She paced in front of the jury box. Vivian Reed made choices. She chose to hide her debt from her husband. She chose to conspire with Richard Morrison to steal from her mother-in-law. She chose to fabricate medical records and witness statements. And when Harold Thompson threatened to expose her, she chose to kill him. Was she desperate? Yes. Was she afraid? Probably. But desperation doesn't excuse murder. Fear doesn't justify fraud. And we cannot, as a society, allow people to destroy the elderly simply because they're in financial trouble. She picked up a photograph of Harold and me from our 40th anniversary. Harold Thompson worked his entire life to provide for his wife. He saved every penny so that Eleanor would be comfortable after he was gone. That was his legacy. And these 3 defendants, she pointed to Morrison, Patricia, and Vivian, tried to steal that legacy for their own profit. Find them guilty. Send a message that elder abuse will not be tolerated. Give Eleanor Thompson justice. Give Harold Thompson peace. Thank you. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, pacing, barely eating. David stayed with me, neither of us able to focus on anything except the trial. On the second day, at 4:37 p.m., my phone rang. It was Jennifer Martinez. They have a verdict. The courtroom was packed when we returned. I sat in my usual seat, David on one side, Frank on the other. My hands were shaking so badly that Frank took one of them and held it steady. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "Justice will be served." The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. I tried to read them, tried to see what they'd decided, but they gave nothing away. Judge Patterson cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood. She was a woman about my age, a retired teacher. Our eyes met for just a moment before she spoke. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the State versus Vivian Reed, on the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find?" The pause felt endless. Then, "Guilty," my breath caught. 1 guilty, but there were more counts. "On the count of elder abuse?" Judge Patterson continued. Another pause. "Guilty." David's hand tightened on mine. 2 guilties, but there were more. My heart pounded against my ribs. "On the count of forgery?" The forewoman's voice never wavered. "Guilty." Frank squeezed my shoulder. 3 guilty verdicts. 1 more to go, the most important one. "On the count of voluntary manslaughter in the death of Harold Thompson?" The longest pause of my life. "Guilty." Vivian collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Her parents clutched each other in the gallery. David squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "In the matter of the State versus Richard Morrison," the forewoman continued, "on all counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and forgery, how do you find?" "Guilty on all counts." Morrison's face went white. "And in the matter of the State versus Patricia Wells on all counts?" "Guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Judge Patterson gavelled for order, but I barely heard it. All I could think was, they believed us. They believed the truth. Sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur. I met with other Morrison victims, Dorothy Brennan's family, Helen Park, who was finally freed from the conservatorship her daughter had established, Albert Russo, whose nephew had stolen his estate. We formed a support group, met every Thursday at my house. We shared our stories, our pain, our victories. And slowly, I began to see that what had happened to me was part of something bigger. Frank was instrumental in this. He'd continued his investigation even after the trial, uncovering more victims, more evidence. The state bar had opened a full investigation into Morrison's entire practice. Other law firms were being examined for similar schemes. "You're changing the system, Mrs. T," Frank told me one afternoon. "Because of you, they're rewriting the rules." The sentencing hearing was smaller than the trial, just family and victims. Judge Patterson looked grave as he addressed the defendants. "Richard Morrison, you were an officer of the court. You swore an oath to uphold the law, to protect your clients. Instead, you preyed on vulnerable families for profit. You corrupted the legal system and destroyed lives. I sentence you to 18 years in state prison." Morrison showed no emotion. "Patricia Wells, you were complicit in these schemes, using your skills to forge documents and create false narratives. I sentence you to 10 years in state prison." Patricia finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. "Vivian Reed," Judge Patterson said, his voice softer. "Your case is the most complex. You were desperate, afraid, drowning in debt. But you chose to hurt an innocent woman rather than ask for help. And most seriously, you took Harold Thompson's life when he threatened to expose you." Vivian stood, trembling. "The prosecution has recommended 25 years. Your defense has asked for leniency. I've considered both positions, as well as the victim impact statements." He paused. "I sentence you to 15 years in state prison on the manslaughter charge, with an additional 5 years for the fraud and elder abuse charges, to run consecutively. You will be eligible for parole after serving 12 years. 20 years. Vivian would be almost 50 when she got out." "Before I close this hearing," Judge Patterson said, "Mrs. Thompson has requested to make a statement." Mrs. Thompson? I stood on shaky legs and walked to the front of the courtroom. I hadn't planned what I would say. The words just came. Vivian, you tried to steal more than my money. You tried to steal my memories of Harold. You wanted me to believe that the man who loved me for 43 years died thinking I was incompetent, broken, not to be trusted. That's a cruelty beyond measure. Vivian was crying, but I continued. You made my son doubt me. You made my friends question my sanity. You made me doubt myself in my darkest moments. But worst of all, you took Harold's last days from him. He died trying to protect me, and you silenced him. I paused, surprised to feel tears on my own cheeks. I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you. But I want you to know something. You failed. You didn't break me. You didn't steal my life. You didn't win. I looked directly at her. I'm going to use what's left of my life to make sure you never do this to anyone else. I'm going to fight for laws that protect people like me. I'm going to help other victims find their strength. And I'm going to make sure Harold's legacy isn't your crime. It's the good that came from exposing it. That's my statement, Your Honor. As I walked back to my seat, something unexpected happened. The other victims in the courtroom began to applaud. Slowly at first, then louder. Judge Patterson didn't stop them. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. For the first time, I stopped to talk to them. Mrs. Thompson, how do you feel about the verdict? I feel that justice was served, but more importantly, I feel hopeful. Hopeful that this case will lead to changes that protect other seniors from predatory practices. What's next for you? I'm working with State Representative Jessica Whitmore on legislation, the Harold Thompson Elder Protection Act. It will require independent medical evaluations for any competency claims, court-appointed advocates for elderly individuals in estate proceedings, and stronger criminal penalties for those who commit elder financial abuse. Will you ever forgive your daughter-in-law? I paused. Forgiveness is complicated. What Vivian did was unforgivable in many ways, but I've learned that holding on to anger only hurts me. So I'm letting go of the anger. That's not the same as forgiveness. It's just freedom. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in the rotunda of the state capitol building. Governor Anderson was about to sign the Harold Thompson Elder Protection Act into law. Mrs. Thompson, the governor said, shaking my hand, your courage in coming forward has helped protect thousands of seniors. Your husband would be proud. Thank you, Governor. David stood beside me, looking healthier than he had in over a year. He'd thrown himself into his work, designing community centers and senior facilities. His architecture firm was recovering. More importantly, he was recovering. Frank was there too, wearing his paralegal certification badge. He'd gotten his license reinstated and was now working for the Attorney General's office, investigating elder abuse cases across the state. As the governor signed the bill, cameras flashing, I felt Harold's presence so strongly it took my breath away. This was his legacy. Not the money, not the estate. This. After the ceremony, I drove to the cemetery. I'd been coming every week, tending to Harold's grave, talking to him like he could hear me. Maybe he could. Maybe that's what faith is. I placed fresh roses, his favorite, on the headstone and sat down on the bench beside his grave. We did it, Harold, I said softly. The law passed. 9 families got their money back from Morrison's estate. Frank's sober and helping other victims. David's healing. And I'm okay. I'm actually okay. The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was his way of responding. I miss you every single day. I miss your laugh, your terrible jokes, the way you'd hum while you shaved. I miss having someone who knew me completely and loved me anyway. I wiped my eyes. But I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm fighting. I'm making sure your death meant something. I pulled out my phone and showed the screen to his headstone, even though I knew it was ridiculous. Look, the Harold Thompson Center for Elder Justice is breaking ground next month. David designed it. Frank's going to work there part-time. We're going to help so many people, Harold, because of you. I sat there for a long time, just being near him. Eventually, I felt a presence beside me and looked up to see Frank approaching hesitantly. Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. T. I wanted to pay my respects. You're not interrupting. Harold would want to see you. He'd be proud of everything you've done. Frank knelt beside the grave and placed his own flowers, simple carnations. Mr. Thompson, I don't know if you can hear me, but I wanted to thank you for treating me like a person when I was at my lowest, for giving me $20 and telling me I was worth more than the bottle. You saved my life that day, even though you didn't know it. And I tried to pay that forward by saving your wife. I hope I did right by you." We stood there together, two people whose lives had been changed by Harold, one by his kindness, one by his love. "You know what I think?" I said finally. "I think Harold brought us together on purpose. You needed to save someone the way you couldn't save your mother. I needed someone to save me the way Harold couldn't. We needed each other." Frank smiled. "Mrs. T, I've been meaning to ask you something. The Thompson Center, we're going to need an executive director. Someone with teaching experience. Someone who understands what victims go through. Someone with the strength to fight for them." "Frank, I'm 65 years old. I'm not qualified to—" "You're the most qualified person I know. You survived this. You fought back. You changed the law. Who better to run a center dedicated to helping others do the same?" I looked at Harold's grave, then back at Frank. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." 3 months later, on what would have been my 44th wedding anniversary, I stood in front of the Harold Thompson Center for Elder Justice. The building was beautiful. David had designed it with warmth and accessibility in mind. Wide doors for wheelchairs, plenty of natural light, comfortable spaces where people could tell their stories without feeling intimidated. My office was on the 2nd floor, with a view of the garden that volunteers had planted, roses, Harold's favorite. On my desk was a photo from our wedding day, and next to it, his wedding ring, which I'd finally been able to remove from my thumb and place in a small display box. My first official act as executive director was to hire Grace Martinez, Morrison's former secretary who'd blown the whistle, as our victim services coordinator. My second was to establish a training program for paralegals like Frank, who wanted to specialize in elder advocacy. David stopped by on opening day with a bottle of champagne. "To Dad," he said, raising his glass. "And to you, Mom, for being stronger than any of us knew." "To your father," I agreed. "And to second chances." We clinked glasses, and I looked around at what we'd built from the ashes of tragedy. The Harold Thompson Center would help hundreds, maybe thousands of seniors protect themselves from predatory practices. Frank's investigation team would catch more criminals like Morrison. The new law would make it harder for people like Vivian to succeed. Harold's death had meaning now. His legacy was protection, justice, hope. That night, alone in my house, I finally did something I'd been avoiding for over a year. I opened Harold's closet and began sorting through his clothes. Not to throw them away, I wasn't ready for that yet, but to organize them, to touch his shirts and remember the man who wore them. In the pocket of his favorite cardigan, I found a note. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wanted you to know that you were the best part of my life. Every morning I woke up next to you was a gift. Every laugh we shared, every challenge we faced together, every quiet moment. All gifts. You're stronger than you think. Whatever comes next, you'll handle it. You always do. I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that coffee shop, trying to grade papers while your coffee went cold. I'll love you forever. All my love, Harold." P.S. The money's yours, Ellie. All of it. Use it however you want. You earned it by putting up with me for all these years. I held the note to my chest and cried. Not tears of grief this time, but tears of gratitude. Harold had known. Even before Vivian's scheme, even before the cancer, he'd known I might doubt myself, might need to hear his voice telling me I was strong. "I am strong," I whispered to the empty room. "You were right, Harold. I'm strong enough for this." 2 years later, the Harold Thompson Center for Elder Justice had helped prevent over 200 cases of elder financial abuse. Frank's investigation team had uncovered 3 more law firms running schemes similar to Morrison's. The Harold Thompson Elder Protection Act had been adopted by 6 other states. David had remarried, a kind woman named Sarah who treated me with genuine warmth. They were expecting their first child, a daughter they planned to name Harper Eleanor. I was going to be a grandmother. For real this time. Vivian was still in prison. She'd written me several letters over the past 2 years. I'd read the first one, where she apologized again and told me she was taking college classes, trying to become a better person. I hadn't responded. Maybe someday I would. Maybe not. I was at peace with either choice. Frank was engaged to a woman he'd met at AA. another person in recovery who understood his journey. He was 4 years sober and thriving in his work at the center. As for me, I discovered something unexpected. I liked my life. Not the life I'd planned, not the quiet retirement Harold and I had imagined, but this life, where I fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves, where I turned my pain into purpose. On my 67th birthday, I received a letter from one of our clients, a woman named Margaret, who we'd helped escape from a guardianship scam. Dear Mrs. Thompson, because of you, I got my life back. Because of you, I proved I was competent to manage my own affairs. Because of you, my granddaughter won't inherit nothing but legal bills. You gave me hope when I had none. Thank you for being strong enough to fight. It taught me to be strong too. I put the letter on my desk next to Harold's photo. Look at that, I said to his picture. We're still making a difference. That evening, I hosted the usual Thursday gathering of Survivor Support Group at my house. We were up to 23 regular members now, all of us with our own stories of attempted financial abuse, all of us finding strength in each other. As I looked around my living room at these survivors, these fighters, I realized something profound. Vivian had tried to take everything from me, but she'd actually given me something invaluable. She'd forced me to discover a strength I didn't know I had. She'd pushed me into a purpose I never would have found otherwise. I didn't thank her for it. What she did was still unforgivable, but I could acknowledge that good had come from evil, that light had emerged from darkness. After everyone left, I sat in Harold's chair by the window and watched the sun set over the garden we'd planted together. The roses were blooming, red, yellow, pink, beautiful and alive, just like me. Happy anniversary, Harold, I whispered. 44 years since you asked me to be your wife. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. The wind chimed through the garden and I smiled. Tomorrow I'd go back to the center. I'd help more people. I'd fight more battles. I'd honor Harold's memory by protecting others the way he'd always protected me. But tonight, I'd just sit here and remember. Remember the good man who'd loved me. Remember the life we'd built. Remember that love, real love, doesn't end with death. It transforms into legacy, and Harold's legacy, our legacy, would help people for generations to come. I was Eleanor Thompson, widow, survivor, fighter, advocate, and I was just getting started.